No shots were fired when the order was given. No lines moved on the map. No cities fell. No flags were raised. And yet, in that moment, an entire army lost its future. This was not a mistake made in panic. It was not confusion. It was not fear. It was a decision. A single instruction issued far from the front by people who would never hear the silence that followed it. The order was simple. It sounded disciplined, responsible, even strong. Hold your position. Do not retreat. On paper, it looked like control. In reality, it removed the one option that keeps armies alive: retreat. Because once retreat is forbidden, every other choice becomes a trap. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Reports were still arriving, supplies were still counted, officers still believed this was temporary. But orders like this don't fail immediately. They work until they don't. And when they stop working, they don't collapse slowly. They lock everything in place. Thousands of men, hundreds of vehicles, entire supply chains. All bound to a line that could no longer move. What makes this order dangerous is not what it demanded, but what it refused to allow. No flexibility, no initiative, no adaptation, only obedience. And obedience in war is only safe when reality cooperates. But reality never does. As the situation shifted, as pressure built, as margins disappeared, this order remained unchanged, because changing it would have meant admitting something unthinkable, that control had already been lost. So the order stayed, and with every passing day, it stopped being a command and became a sentence. Not announced, not acknowledged, just silently enforced. By the time anyone realized what it truly meant, there was no way to undo it. The army was still standing, but it was already trapped. From a distance, everything still looked manageable. Maps were updated, numbers were revised, reports arrived on schedule. In headquarters, the situation felt contained. Not good, not safe, but controlled. Lines on the map still held. Units still existed. The army still answered orders. And that was enough to maintain the illusion. Because control in war is not about reality. It is about information. What reached the top was filtered, summarized, adjusted, not necessarily false, just incomplete. Losses became acceptable. Delays became temporary. Shortages became logistical challenges. Language softened what reality was hardening. And the order, hold your position, fit perfectly into this picture. As long as the army stayed where it was, it could be counted, measured, explained. Movement creates uncertainty. Retreat creates questions, and questions create responsibility. So nothing moved. The command structure remained intact. Ranks functioned. Discipline held. From the outside, this looked like strength. But control that relies on stillness is fragile, because the battlefield never stops moving. Pressure builds quietly. Supply routes thin. Fatigue accumulates. None of this appears dramatic on a map, and that is the danger. Every day the army stayed in place, the margin for error shrank. But shrinking margins don't trigger alarms. They don't demand immediate action. They wait. The people issuing orders believed they were buying time. In reality, time was being taken from them. And the most dangerous part? The system was still working, which meant there was no clear moment to admit it wasn't. No collapse, no obvious failure, just a growing gap between what was believed and what was possible. The illusion of control held precisely because it hadn't broken yet. And that is how traps form. Not when things fall apart, but when they appear stable just long enough to make escape impossible.
The illusion did not break all at once. It narrowed. First, supply reports stopped matching expectations. Then, movement became slower. Then, routes that were marked as secure simply disappeared. At this point, the order was still in effect. Hold your position. But now, holding meant something different. It meant waiting for deliveries that arrived late. It meant counting fuel instead of distance. It meant planning days instead of weeks. And it was here, quietly, unmistakably, that reality closed in. The city had a name. By now, everyone knew it. Stalingrad. And the calendar had crossed into a new phase of the war. Late 1942, early 1943. This was no longer an advance. It was no longer a battle for momentum. It was containment. Soviet forces had moved where the maps said they couldn't. Encirclement was no longer a risk, it was a condition. The army was still organized, still armed, still receiving orders, but it was no longer connected. Not to reserves, not to reliable supply, not to the future. From the outside, this still looked like resistance. From the inside, it felt like compression. Every option led back to the same problem. Movement required permission, and permission no longer existed. The order remained unchanged. No retreat, no breakout, no independent action. What had once been discipline became immobility, and immobility under pressure is not defense, it is exposure. By the time the word encirclement was used openly, it described something that had already happened. Not a moment, a process. And that process had a name now, a place, a time. Stalingrad, 1943. The point where control met reality and did not survive the encounter.
Once encirclement became reality, options disappeared faster than anyone expected. On paper, there were still solutions: a breakout, a relief operation, resupply from the air. Each one looked possible as long as it stayed theoretical. In reality, none of them survived contact with facts. Breaking out required fuel. Fuel was already rationed. A relief force required time. Time was the one resource the army no longer had. And air supply, the last hope, was never designed to sustain an entire army. Not at this scale, not in these conditions. Every flight delivered less than planned. Every delay compounded the shortage. Every promise of tomorrow cost another day. What had once been strategy became arithmetic. Calories, ammunition, hours of daylight, weather windows. The numbers never added up. And yet the order remained: hold your position. At this stage, holding no longer meant resisting the enemy, it meant resisting reality. Commanders on the ground understood what headquarters could not accept, that survival and obedience were now in conflict. Moving without permission meant disobedience. Staying meant exhaustion. There was no correct choice, only different ways to fail. And so the system froze. Requests went unanswered. Initiative disappeared. Risk was avoided at all costs. Not because it was dangerous, but because unpredictability was. The army stopped thinking in terms of victory, then in terms of breakthrough. Finally, only in terms of endurance. How long can this be held together? Days, weeks, not outcomes. By the time this question dominated every decision, the answer no longer mattered, because an army can fight without hope, but it cannot function without options. And by early 1943, there were none left. No corridor to retreat through, no force coming to relieve them, no supply chain that could sustain them, just an order that could not be reversed without consequences no one was willing to face. The trap was complete, not because escape was impossible, but because permission never came.